Okay, so you notice how all the videos start with, okay. So we're going to talk about finishing things up. So very, very generally speaking, and these are things that you're really going to find your own way into, but let's talk about a couple things. The first one is hair, right? So overall with the hair, we've talked about a lot about just massing up the hairs, but how do we make it feel like hair, okay? Without, you know, like making every single hair on the head. Part of that is going to happen through the way we separate the hair from the skin, right? So here with bangs, yeah, there's obviously a separation in reality, and what I want to do is just make sure that the forehead runs up underneath those bangs, right? When you have hair like a sideburn or something like that, a lot of times you'll have the mass of the hair, like a sideburn would be very thin, but you would bring it down so that there isn't as hard of a shadow. I don't know if you can see that. So that there isn't as hard of a shadow, right? Like the less shadow I have, the more it feels like the hair comes and starts to interact with the face. One of the things I want to avoid, even with like, especially with a haircut like this, which is very separate from the face, is I want to avoid getting like a really hard dark line, so that I don't want the hair to feel like a wig. So even with a very structural haircut like this, softening some edges and bringing them closer to the skin will help break up that kind of like wig likeness. Other than that, it's really a matter of thinking about the mask. So here we've got bangs, right? And that's a separate thing. So the bangs are gonna like roll around. My first step is gonna be to find the form of the hair, right? The bangs are gonna roll around, and then this hair is gonna come down over. And I can denote that by creating a little shelf, right? Like that. So there's the side of the hair coming down from where the bangs are. It creates a little shelf against the bangs, and then that shelf continues down around the face. So I can sculpt my hair like that, right? If you have your hair pulled back and it's a little shorter on the sides, right? This could come up and roll and come back, all kinds of things. The second thing is I want to think about like what level of rendering I want on that hair relative to the rendering on my face, right? Like if I put a really crazy, like intricate hairdo on top of a very minimal head without a lot of information on it, it's gonna be kind of strange, right? So, the main thing that'll show the difference between the hair and the skin is the texture, okay? I don't wanna make a lot of decisions up here until I have all my decisions here made. But I do want to bring the hair up to the same level of rendering as this, which is putting in these secondary kind of contours and fixing them where I need to, right? Like maybe I want just a little bit more of that edge there. Generally speaking, with modeling, as you start to finish things up, right, we've got all of our parts in, we did last time. What I really want to start to do is think about how rendered I want this to get. So for example, here, if I want that to appear less contrasty, less riddled with holes, what I'm going to do is put just enough clay in there to fill that area, and then I'm going to work it across into the other forms, right? Like I spent a long time making that chin and making that little fleshy pad, So I'm not going to smooth the face by smashing the clay in and pushing on it, right? That's usually the first common mistake, is when you go to smooth things out or connect the forms that you put a lot of pressure into the clay. From here on out, all of my work is across the surface of the clay. Across. All I'm doing is creating edges and planes, right? So if I've got all my bits in the right place, I should be able to just fill those gaps and smooth them across and then have the form that I want, right? If not, I can go back in and I can, you know, recut the shape and massage it. And here's kind of a really good example of this. So the shape of the chin here, right? You can see the nice like down part of the lip, nice shadow, really deep shadow right across there, and the shape of that light and the shape of that shadow on the front. Well, I'm going to compare that to my, look at the difference. So what's different here? Well, the chin here has more light on it. What does that tell me? What that tells me is that if I've got this contour, the bottom of that, raked back in space that's setting shadow, and what I really need to do is bring it a little forward so it catches light. So I'm going to use my model, my pictures of my model, to start to look at light and shadow and decide what I need to do. There, that's a little more appropriate, right? A little more like to like. So I start to compare and contrast, where I see light and shadow here and the shape of it, and where I see light and shadow on the head I'm making, and I adjust accordingly. And here's kind of the rule, right? If it has light on it, that means it's angled open upwards, right? Watch my hand. So angling, fingers angle back, so it's angled that way. If it has shadow on it, it's angled that way, right? Top out. And also, the deeper the shadow, the steeper the angle. So for example, up under here, right, that is a much steeper angle back into the head to create that shadow than the soft shadow below the cheek. That's a much more shallow angle, right? So as I'm going along, I can literally like train my hand to put more pressure where I see more shadow, okay? So it's little nuances that make the difference, right? Just adjusting the edge of, say, like where, here, right? Like I can turn this into a completely different person by just changing where the light on that chin falls, right? Now it's like a completely different person. Totally different shape. Face shape. Okay? So as you go along, your marks get smaller and smaller, right? You start to be more and more subtle about where you create those edges. But again, try to keep your action across the surface of the clay, okay? Not into it. So, oh, the other thing is, and this is a really nice thing to keep in mind, is that I think we have a tendency to get a little bit lazy, and like I'll just use the same tool for the whole process. And what happens then is that I get a bunch of that tool mark everywhere. Okay? What I really want to think about is if the shape is big, like the cheek, then I want a big mark on that. And if the shape is small, right, like the nostril, then I want a small mark on that. So I'm not going to, if I want that cheek to be smooth, I'm going to use a big tool and big marks, big marks to do that, right? So that that cheek is nice and big and clean, right? And then when I come to there, I'm going to, the cheekbone, I'm going to make that mark at the size of that cheekbone, right? So I'm not gonna use my small tool to make that cheekbone and then come in here and go like this to make my cheek, right? That extra texture there just confuses things, okay? So big tool, big mark, big shape. Small tool, small mark, small shape, right? So size and shape of your marks. Darker shadow is a more steep undercut, right? Play to light and shadow. Use the light and shadow from your images, from your model to make adjustments. The closer and closer you get, the smaller and smaller the adjustment. Hair-wise, you know, sometimes it's nice. I don't really put a lot into hair, but sometimes it's nice to just make, once you have the form down, to make other little shelves like this. Like that little shelf tells me something about that little chunk of hair being broken up, right? What I don't want to do is start to just do this. Okay? Look how much visual attention that dark drawing, this is just drawing, right? It's not sculpture, it's just drawing. But look how that pulls away from the face, right? Whereas the more subtle shadow of a plane shift like that adds information that lives in the same kind of vernacular, in the same language as the form of the face, okay? All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna work a little while and then the end of this video will be me kind of working in double speed and, you know, finishing things up. All right.